Hello, everyone. I'm Shannon Torrance, and welcome to Magic is Real, a podcast focused on proof of afterlife, whose mission is to bring hope and inspiration to others and to spread the word that death is only an illusion. If these interviews resonate with you and you want to hear more like them, you can support the podcast by liking, subscribing, and sharing with like-minded friends. Thank you so much, and thank you for being a part of the Magic is Real family. I wish you peace, light, and love always. Hello, Magic is Real listeners. Thank you so much for being here today. I have with me Nancy Rynes. Did I pronounce your name correctly, Nancy?
You did.
Thank you. I'm so glad I did. Nancy is the author of two books, Awakening from the Light and Walking in the Light, which are based on her experiences of having had two near-death experiences and the insights that resulted from those experiences. Nancy, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me on your program. I'm looking forward to talking with you today.
I am too. I know of you. Before I started doing this podcast, I watched all the near-death experience videos that I could get my hands on. So I'm very happy to meet you and have you here. So first of all, Nancy, I'd love to have you sort of introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about what I love about your story is the fact that you come from an atheist/agnostic background. I always think that those are the most compelling. And I'd love to know about that, but also what was your life like before this, and who would you have said you were? Who was Nancy? Who was Nancy Rynes? And what did your life look like? You can start as far back as you want to.
Okay. I think it makes sense to just briefly mention a little bit about my childhood. It was interesting because the reason I bring this up is because I've gone through these waves, in my life where I was spiritual and then went to being kind of an atheist or agnostic and then back to spiritual. So when I was a little kid, I'm talking 4, 5, 6 years old, I was very spiritual. And I didn't really, I didn't like think that was a big deal at the time. That's really just who I was. But it's possible that I had an NDE when I was about 4 years old, and that may have been what prompted when I was really young, to be very spiritual. I fell off the side of a barn and hit concrete and was, I had to be revived and was out for like 45 minutes. But I came back from that really kind of seeing, and in my 4 or 5 year old terminology, you have to understand it's different now, but back then it was that I was seeing God everywhere. God was in everything, everything was beautiful. It was very much like what happened after this NDE when I was older. So I had quite a few years of that when I was young. And I was just walking in this, this space of being very spiritual, but my family we were a farm family and blue collar type people in the Midwest. And so I was raised in farm country, working, baling hay and, tending the cattle and that kind of thing. Um, but we went to church on Sunday, but it was more because that's what you did, not because that's really what it seemed my parents believed. It was just, that's how they were raised. And so that's what you did. And it was a Catholic church. And when I was in my teens, that's when you start putting things together and really like thinking about stuff. I started to really not like the Catholic Church when I was in my teens because of what was going on with, there were a lot of that was the time when the huge scandals about, priests sexually assaulting kids and a whole bunch of sexual misconduct was coming out in the church. I mean, everybody knew about it before then, but nobody really wanted to do anything about it. But I didn't, I was a kid, I didn't know what all that was. And I started getting really angry at the church and angry at God. In my teenage years, how could God allow that to happen, especially in his church, right? So that's where my thinking kind of went. And I really just pushed I got really turned off by the whole idea of religion and even spirituality. I didn't know there was a difference between the two back then. So everything was, religion. And I got really turned off by all those stories. And then, just reading about the history of what the Roman Catholic Church has done over the years, to people, the Native American, you name it. It's just across the board. They were not great for a lot of their years. And I really got turned off by that. Now I know there's some people out there that who are Roman Catholics right now, so trust me, I understand it's not you. That was the institution of the church. And I didn't understand the difference at the time, that there was a difference between the people who were running the church and the spirituality behind it. So that was my teenage understanding of it, was that they were all the same. And so I kind of just rejected the whole thing. And then I went to art school, and then also decided, because I loved art and I loved the sciences kind of at the same level. And so I went to art school for a couple of years, and then I went and studied archaeology and geology in college. I got my degrees in those, and then then did some work I was actually an archaeological artist for a while, and then did some work with the U.S. government for geology type stuff, and it was during those times, when I was in college and then grad school, and then definitely afterwards, where I was, a practicing scientist. It was not cool back then in the sciences to even voice the idea that you were curious about stuff. And even though I kind of rejected the church, I was still curious about certain things because I still had weird things happening to me that I couldn't explain. Precognitions that were very clear, knowing where things were in a place where I've never been before. Odd things like that, that science at that time really couldn't explain. But because the sciences, especially back then, they were almost as dogmatically religious about their science as the Catholic priests were about being Catholic. You couldn't talk about that stuff really, except to kind of laugh it off. You weren't supposed to take it seriously, at least in the circles I ran in. And so I just really pushed that aside for a while, although I was still curious. I was still curious about I was a historian, and I still loved to read about, the history, especially from, Egyptian times, because I did a lot of it. Yeah, I did Egyptology when I was in school, and from Egyptian times all the way through like the Crusades. I loved learning about that and going to places and seeing stuff. But I still had these experiences that I couldn't explain, but I just like, because I couldn't explain them, I just brushed them off to the side and didn't really follow up on them, because even my friends thought I was nuts, for being sort of interested in this. But to me, I guess even back then, that's what a scientist really is. It's really truly, a scientist should be someone who's curious and open to exploring and testing stuff and experimenting and trying to figure out what that is or why that is. Um, but unfortunately, I think the tide's turning now, but especially back then, science wasn't that way. It was very rigid and inflexible. But so I just kind of did my little thing on the side and didn't tell anybody, which made my friendship relationships a little bit challenging because it was all with scientists. So that's really how I spent most of my adult life, my career. I was a science writer. I did work in the engineering field as well, so, software engineering, but really as a writer and a trainer. I trained geoscientists on how to use very high tech pieces of software. So it all kind of, fit together in that whole scientific philosophy. Um, and then so in my early to mid 40s, I was starting to feel like something was missing. And, I didn't really know what it was. I was thinking, well, maybe I need to find another job, maybe I need to, do this external thing was making me unhappy, right? Whatever it was, I didn't know what it was. So I was looking to something external for the reason why I wasn't feeling, really good in here. Just because I didn't have that, I guess I didn't have that background to look internally first. So at that point, I was working at the scientific software company in Boulder, Colorado. And that was the place that I was a writer and a trainer. And, and, and this kind of leads into that NDE that I had. I knew something was, I could almost feel something going to shift in my life when this all happened. And I had taken a week off between Christmas and New Year's that year, and just to chill out and, take some time off and do whatever. And so I lived kind of outside of Boulder, and I went for a bike ride it was just crystal clear. One Friday morning, it was January 3rd, and I left at, I think it was like 10:30 a.m. I left my house. And there was something telling me not to go out that day, but I kind of said, nah, I'm going to go anyway. I just had this instinct to put my bike back away and go back in the house and do something else. But I went about my way. I decided to go for this ride. And I was really just going to do a couple of quick errands around town and then head off to the bike path and just Boulder, Colorado is just full of bike paths, and there was a beautiful bike path through this creek area that I wanted to go to. And so I set off on this bike ride, and it was, the first part of it would be on street, but there was a decent sized bike lane. It was pretty wide on each side of the street. So I'm in the bike lane, not even, honest to God, not even 10 minutes from my house. I entered a traffic circle, and it was a new traffic circle that they had just put in just maybe a couple months before. But I didn't notice there was no bike lane in it. So the circle got really narrow, way narrower than the lane, as it was coming in. And of course there was no bike lane. So the driving lane was really narrow. There was no place for me to go. So I'm cautiously kind of going into this traffic circle. There's a vehicle behind me. It was a Subaru. I think it was a Forester. I can remember the color, everything. But I get into the traffic circle and I notice like there's traffic coming in from the right. And at first I thought they were going to stop. There was a big SUV, and then behind it was a pickup truck. And I thought the big SUV it looked like it was going to stop. So I kind of cautiously proceeded. And at the last minute, they're supposed to stop when there's traffic in the circle. Well, she didn't. She ended up flooring it, and hit me on my right side. And I just remember it was just like this moment that seems to have gone on for eternity, when I tried to push off, but I didn't really know what to do because there was that car behind me, and I didn't really see a good way out of this. I had a car behind me. I had her hitting me, and then there was a truck behind her, and there was nowhere to go. And so I ended up somehow flipping up onto the hood of this SUV with the woman who was driving it. And I managed to kind of grab on to the front top of the hood, or the bonnet, as they say in Britain. And I've been looking in at her, and she's on her cell phone. She's texting on her cell phone, like on the steering wheel, like this. And she didn't even see me. I'm like,
Wow.
she's so busy with her cell phone that she didn't even see me staring in the window at her.
Oh my God. That's a testament for not texting and driving. That's the
Right.
best one I've heard. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she had no idea I was there. and she just kept driving, and I'm like, hello. I'm trying to like pound on the hood of the vehicle to get her attention, but I didn't really want to let go too much because she was still driving. And I couldn't hang on any longer. My hands kind of gave out, and so I slid down the hood as she's driving, and I hit the pavement. And I thought, great, she's gonna, I'm dead. She's gonna run over me. She did run over me, except that I was right in between her wheels, like perfectly in between her
Ugh.
wheels. But when I hit the pavement, I did, I did crack a lot of bones. That was the first. I could hear that stuff. Not pretty. You don't ever want to hear that stuff. Um, and so I saw the truck kind of, or the SUV come over me, and then something happened. I had a backpack on, and there was like a chest strap, like across here, and that somehow got caught on something underneath her axle. I don't really, I still can't quite figure out what it got caught on, but it got caught on something. And I could feel myself kind of being dragged along. And I just didn't even think. I reached up, and because I was scared about getting, run over. I wasn't thinking at that point. It was all just reaction. So I reached up and grabbed on, like, kind of like this to her axle, because I didn't know she's in a turn. I didn't know what would happen if that chest strap gave out and the back wheels would run over me. So I think in my head I was gonna like wait until she got out onto the straight part of the street and then let go. But it didn't get that far. So she's in the turn, and the guy behind her in that truck saw what happened. And he I don't know, he must have been crazy with intention or something. He drove like partially on the grass to turn and go the other way around the circle and stop her. I mean, he like physically used his truck to block her from driving. And so I'm like so grateful for him,
Yeah.
for doing that, because he didn't have to do that, but he did. And so she finally stopped. Luckily for me, the guy that was in the Subaru behind me was a trauma doctor.
Wow.
And there was also a trauma or ER nurse on the scene as well, who just kind of showed up out of nowhere. I still don't know where she came from, but she showed up out of nowhere. And between the two of them, mostly the nurse actually, she had me stabilized. I was trying to get up and run away. That was my like
Yeah.
instinct. And she held me down and kept me from moving. And she actually saved my life, because if I had gotten up, I would not have. My entire spine was a mess. I probably would have died on the spot instantly, because my neck was broken in like 5 places, and I had I had no ligaments or tendons that were whole. I mean, they were all, torn apart and ripped up, and there was nothing holding my neck together at that point, except some muscles. That was about it. It was bad. So she kept me down on the ground, which was really truly saved my life. I'm so grateful to her for doing that. And and the paramedics came. They got me to the hospital, and it was worse than I thought. I mean, I knew I'd broken some bones, but it was way worse than I thought. It was mostly trauma to my spine, and I had in my lower back, one vertebrae was completely blown apart. There was almost nothing left of it. And then my neck, like I said, my neck was in pretty bad shape. But I think they counted at least 24 bones that were broken. And those bones weren't just broken in one place, they were broken in multiple places. So the amount of fractures was probably well over 100 different fractures. But the worst part of it was, I had a collapsed lung. Not surprising, because I had broken ribs on my left side. I had internal bleeding in my pelvic area, and there was some weird trauma to my brain that they really wouldn't talk about. I had a helmet on, but the helmet actually had broken apart during all of this and fell kind of fell off my head. Um, but they actually didn't expect me to live the weekend because of the head trauma. And it's weird because I was functioning mentally fine. I could remember every detail of everything. I knew who people were. I mean, it wasn't like I was losing my mental capacity. So when they told me that I had, brain trauma, I'm like, doesn't make sense because I'm functioning
Yeah.
on all cylinders. It didn't compute. Um, and I'm still not really sure what all that was, and at least at that point until a little bit later. But it didn't affect my memory. It didn't affect my vision. It didn't affect functioning, normal everyday functioning. So I didn't really feel any effect of that. But the doctors told my family not to expect me to live the weekend because of what they saw going on in my brain. Um, but that actually cleared up pretty quickly. So by a couple of days later, they were okay with me going into surgery. So they weren't going to do anything on me at first. They were going to let the whatever was going on with my brain kind of settle down, and it did. And so they had me in surgery Monday, which was, what is that, 3 days later, to repair my back, because that was actually the worst. It was They would need to insert like about 12 inches of titanium rods on either side of my spine, in order for me to be able to walk again. So that was really where the NDE happened, was during that surgery. And I basically, just as soon as they gave me the anesthetic, I was gone. I had my heart rate stopped, my breathing stopped, my blood pressure went to like zero. And I don't know if they could have easily accidentally overdosed me, or I had just had most likely I just had a really weird reaction,
Yeah.
to the anesthetic. And that's what did it. That's what kind of propelled me on this journey that I've been on ever since.
Wow. That's incredible. You also mentioned, I've heard you mention that when this happened to you, there was this moment where I don't know how you experienced it. You can tell me, where you did feel you were seeing things from sort of a, I don't want to say, I don't, a 360-degree view, or you sort of had the awareness of being in different places at once. Can you
Right.
explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I still, I maybe have a better understanding of it now, but back then I had no idea what to do with this. So as the accident happened, as I hit the pavement, I slid off of her truck, off of the SUV, and hit the pavement. Um, I noticed that my awareness was split. Some people call it bilocation. I don't like that term because I don't think it really gets at what I experienced. So there was an awareness, a part of my awareness that stayed in my body. And I just call that my body consciousness, that consciousness that we all have, that's really the body's own consciousness. Everyone has it, everything has it, every animal has it. And for me, I experienced that part of my consciousness was very centered on survival.
Mhm.
It was very centered on fear. I couldn't actually think, which is really odd. I could feel, and I could feel fear, but I couldn't like analytically think. It was basic survival, mode. Now, the part of me, it wasn't like I even experienced being pulled out of my body. It was just all of a sudden I had a higher level of my own awareness that was outside of my body, watching the whole thing unfold from the side. It was weird. It was like from about, I don't know, 50 to 75 feet off to the side, something like that. And and I didn't actually feel like I was a physical being. I actually felt like a spirit at that point. I thought I was dead, honestly, and that was my spirit, and that's probably pretty close to what was going on. Um, but that was, in hindsight, my higher awareness, my higher self, my soul consciousness, if you will, was propelled out of the body and just watching everything. And that aspect of me was very calm, like so calm that I couldn't, that the human me couldn't believe it. Or there was like almost this tension between the two, like, how can you be so calm? And that soul consciousness of me said, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. It's painful right now, but it is as it should be. And I'm thinking, what?
Yeah.
It is as it should be, and everything will be absolutely a-okay in the end. And I couldn't believe that I was hearing this. Like, what are you talking about? I'm being run over by an SUV. This is not okay.
Yeah.
But that's really what I was kind of going back and forth between those two parts of my awareness.
Yeah. And I find it interesting that it almost to me sounds like it was like you had a little glimpse of your soul separating. It wasn't quite, it hadn't quite made a transition. And when you say, I don't know what happened why my body reacted to anesthesia, my answer to that is because you were meant to have a
Yeah.
full, it's almost like, yeah, I mean, technically from a scientific standpoint, your body reacted weirdly and it was beat up and probably just had a weird reaction, but it seems uh, pretty planned out. I don't know if you agree with me, but
Yeah.
that you were meant to have a greater experience. So, um, yeah. So after you go under, what is your experience?
Yeah. I went under, and as they actually injected me with the anesthesia while I was still completely awake and in the operating room, which I really wish they would do this differently. I understand why they do it, but it's kind of freaky when you're fully awake and in the OR and you see everything around. It just is not a good thing from a patient's
Yeah,
perspective.
that's a good point.
I don't know why they do that. It just doesn't. It's scary, actually, for
It
most
is. You're
patients.
right.
Um, the color of the room, to this day, I hate the color yellow because the color of the operating room was bright sunflower yellow. And they do that, they paint it those colors to keep
Yeah.
the surgeons and the nurses awake and alert. But now I associate yellow with being in surgery. Anyway, so they put this anesthesia in me, and as I'm drifting off, I kind of thought I knew what I was going to expect. Now I've had surgery before, and typically when you get a general anesthetic, you just kind of, your consciousness just shuts down, and that's really what the thing does. It shuts down your consciousness, and you basically experience gray nothingness.
Hmm.
And then they wake you up, and it's no big deal. That's typically what happens. And they typically will also give you an amnesiac drug in the mix, so that if you do wake up during surgery, you don't remember it. Well, they did give me that, and they gave me the full-on general anesthetic. But as I drifted off, when they were injecting me with I didn't go to that gray state. I kind of came to, and I'm looking around, and first of all, I'm standing up, which I shouldn't be doing because, I was just in the operating room. And around me is this beautiful, I'm like on a hillside, on a meadow in a hillside, and seeing kind of mountains off in the distance with not really a sun, but the sky was kind of this bright, shimmering, light filled blue. So there was not really a sunrise, sunset. I didn't see a sun in the sky, but it was just bright. It was a bright blue. And and all around me was just this, it was beautiful. There was energy everywhere. Everything looked perfect. It was so peaceful. And I was thinking to myself, very clearly thinking this, like, well, I must be hallucinating. And that's okay if I'm hallucinating, because this is an okay place to spend surgery. I could do this.
Yeah.
So that was my first thought. Now, the interesting thing is when I spoke to Dr. Evan Alexander about this and Dr. Sam Parney and a couple of other physicians. And they said, well, you shouldn't have been able to think anyway. So if there is no such thing as soul, and if they just gave you this anesthesia, you should not have been able to put those words together in your head because of the amount of anesthesia that I had and the amnesia drug. So that in and of itself spoke to the fact that consciousness is not produced by this
Right.
thing up here.
And for you to be able to remember it.
Yeah, it was clear. It was really
Yeah.
clear. I was like looking around trying to figure out what was going on and just analyzing, like, is it this? No, and going back and forth like a scientist, analyzing everything. And wow, that flower looks weird. I've never seen flowers that have energy flowing up into them before. And I came to the conclusion that at first that it was a hallucination brought on by the anesthesia. But then the longer that I was there, the more I'm thinking, I don't think this is a hallucination, because this feels way too real. And I have had the unfortunate um, incident before of hallucinating to a drug. Been given Vicodin several years before for some back pain that I was having, and that was not fun. And I know what a full-on hallucination is like. I realized that what I was experiencing was not a hallucination. It was crystal clear real. And I was beginning to understand that this was more real than where I was on Earth. And then I started feeling these waves of kind of, at first I thought it was just energy coming into me. And I realized it was love, and it was a welcoming peace and love just coming into me, like you would stand. I always say it's like standing in front of a fire on a warm or on a really cold day, where you get that radiation of heat coming into you from the fire. And that's what it felt like. It felt like I was being welcomed and hugged and embraced by some level of love that I couldn't understand. And I realized that before I even I realized that I was home before I realized that I was no longer alive. So I went, "Oh my gosh, I'm home finally." And then I had the thought, "Oh my gosh, I think I just died on the operating table. And if I did die, why am I here?" My parents told me that I'd end up in hell because I didn't believe in God. I was an atheist. So I thought about, why am I here? This isn't making any sense. I think I died, but I should be experiencing something different. And then there was like a voice that wasn't really a voice. It wasn't like you would hear with your ears. It was more a voice that you would hear with your heart. And it wasn't really specifically a gender. It was kind of gender neutral, but it was very powerful and and kind of loud. And it said something to the effect of, "This is your home. You are a child of mine." And I don't think it meant child in the way that we would mean it, but more like, "You're a part of me. You're a part of us. Welcome home. This is your home." And I just kind of broke down and started weeping because I just remembered that this whole thing on Earth was really a simulation or an illusion or something like that. And where I was now was closer to real than anything I ever felt, on the Earth plane. And I don't know how long I was a blubbering mess, but it was a while, because I just felt so loved for the first time ever, in my life, at least in that human life. And sometime later, I don't know how long, a spiritual type being, a kind of a she kind of glowed, really. She was shimmering, silvery, vaguely human looking being came to me and introduced herself as my teacher or my guide. And she would teach me what I needed to know in order to go back to my life on earth and make it one that would be more of what I wanted it to be, and to help other people. And and I really had a reaction to that because I did not want to go back. Really didn't. I wanted to go and see my I had some family members who had passed on before me, and I wanted to see them. I wasn't able to, but I really wanted to go see them. And she said, "No, you've already agreed to go back. That's what, you've agreed to do this. You've agreed to have this experience, learn what you need to learn and then go back." And I said, "I don't remember that." I was kind of like a 2-year-old would be. I was kind of in her face about a few things. And she got in my face and showed me, this almost like a video of me before, kind of planning out my life, not really planning it down to the nth degree, but kind of speaking with my my spirit guides about some of the things that I wanted to learn, some of the things that I wanted to do. Um, and if I didn't do this by this time in my life, then I'd have this experience. So just some things like laying out some of the groundwork for what I wanted to do. And I knew that it wasn't like I wasn't being held to the fire or anything, but it was more like just a general kind of an idea of what I wanted to accomplish. And in that was, well, I remember this part, if I hadn't turned away from my atheism. Now, my atheism was planned, by the way, which was interesting. I had planned that out, that I would turn away, but then I would come back and become more, again, aligned with spirituality. I needed, for whatever reason, there was a lesson for me in being an atheist for a while, or maybe it was to help me um, relate to people who are, so that I could more easily, understand what they were feeling and going through, and where they were coming from. So I had, my agreement was to have this experience of being an atheist. And then there were like 3 or 4 events prior to the NDE that could have made me go back onto a spiritual path. And I blew right through all of them. And so the agreement was that if I blew through all of those, then I would have a big event such as this NDE to kind of bring me back into the fold and to get me back on a track of what I was supposed to be doing. So that's what I was kind of, when she showed that to me, there was nothing I could say. Well, it's right there in front of you. What are you gonna say? Um, so I agreed to just go ahead and, learn from her whatever it was that she was going to teach me. And it was interesting because she said it was stuff that most of us either have never learned or just choose to forget, and we don't really pay much attention to it. A lot of simple concepts that we oftentimes like to ignore, but that are really, really important. Um, one of them is just the basics of love. What is love? You know, what does it mean to love someone? What's the overall power of that? It's not just an emotion, it's an action, it's an energy. What is the how can we use that love to connect to other people, not just one on one, but to connect with people 3,000 miles away and know what someone is doing. Like, I know, for example, when one of my sisters is in pain, I can feel it because I'm connected to them through that love. When I concentrate it, it's not like I'm spying on them all the time, but when I focus on that, when I focus on connecting with them, then I can feel what it is that they're feeling. They're probably going to be creeped out if they hear that. But I think they know. I've had some interesting experiences with them, and where I know what's going on with their bodies before they even know what's going on with them. So I think they're used to it by now. But there are things that you can do with that, connecting to that higher energy, and love really is kind of that highest energy that holds everything together. Unfortunately, the word that we have for love doesn't really it doesn't really cut it as far as what it means on a spiritual level. Humans have this, we think of it as a person to person kind of thing. What I'm talking about really is the energy that runs the entire universe or even the multiverse. It's everything. It's that divine field. I think that's what Greg Braden calls it, or the divine matrix. It's that energy at that level that we can connect to. Now, our part of it is what we call, one-on-one love for our kids, love for our partner, love for friends, whatever that is. But if you take that to the highest level, that is really, that energy is what runs this entire simulation, if you will. It's the energy of all of this. It's that divine energy. And she said, if you only get one thing out of it, just that understanding alone is plenty. But she talked about stuff like, the importance of gratitude, of loving yourself, not just giving love outward to other people, but truly working on surrounding yourself in love and kindness and compassion, because that can shift your health. I mean, that can shift your reality right there. Um, and I'm starting to work on putting that together into a like an online training course. So that's coming
Great.
down the road. But there is so much power in just love, because gratitude is love. Um, the importance of forming, a community of like-minded people, not necessarily your physical neighborhood that you live in, and not really just friends, but just this community. Could be over a hobby, it could be over like a spiritual group that you go to once a month or whatever.
It could be
um,
that I've found that I was just saying, even with COVID, I feel richer in my relationships because of this podcast. I've
yeah,
become friends with everyone that I've interviewed, and it's become this community.
yeah,
And I was just talking about that. So I think it's really interesting. It doesn't have to be,
yeah,
like a Sex in the City type of situation where you're going
right,
out to it. It can be, my friends are all over the world because of this,
right.
and we all connect on this level, which is beautiful.
That's exactly it. Right there. That's exactly it. And and it was interesting, the timing of that, because it was obviously pre-pandemic, but she was very insistent that forming these communities, however we do it, is very, very, very important. Um, and I think there was a little bit of a precursor of what was to come, like how important that would become, like for what you do. I don't host a podcast, but I love being on other people's
Yeah.
podcasts, and that it also is part of the community. It's
You're
doing,
connecting. You're really
yeah,
creating
yeah,
connection, which is the whole point.
however you can do that, any of
Yeah.
those connections. If you can belong to like a community garden group,
Hmm.
that's another way. So there's so many ways to connect. So that's really super important, because that's how we're wired as people. That we're wired to really be a part of a group. And it can be multiple groups. It doesn't have to be just one.
Hmm.
So that's another big one. It's the other one really that kind of goes along with that was just how interconnected we all are. And not just with each other as human beings, but with our environment, with the place that we live, with the animals around us, our pets, the wildlife, the rocks, the trees, the streams, the rivers, everything, every being is all a part of this same divine field, this divine consciousness, and it's all equivalent. Um, no one's better than the other. Humans aren't better than polar bears or, ducks on the pond. We're just different. We have a different set of skills. We have a different way of looking at the world. Actually, I think the most evolved beings on this planet are the dolphins, quite frankly,
Mhm.
but I don't think it's us.
Yeah.
But we have to understand that we're all intimately connected, and not just on this planet. It's everywhere throughout the universe. It's all planets, all other beings out there. And yeah, there are other beings
Mhm.
out there. It's not just us. We need to get out of this earth-centric view of reality. There's more. There is more to this universe than just us, and we're all connected through the universe in some weird way that Einstein couldn't wrap his brain around, and some most of the time I can't either, but it,
Right.
it but it really is there. So a lot of stuff like that, I put that in my book Awakenings from the Light so that people could take time and
Yeah, I can't
really
wait to
read
read it
it.
because I'm just fixated on every word, and it's so validating too. Just to hear, yeah, I feel like you talk about self-love. And I know my journey was that was I didn't have trauma from other people. It was all in my own head. It was all beating myself up, thinking I was not worthy, thinking I wasn't lovable,
Yeah.
believing I was ugly, believing and that's what I attracted is people who couldn't love me the way that because I didn't love myself. And it's a cliche for a reason, but it took all these years of therapy and 12 step to get to the point of where I am now, which is, now having had a spiritual awakening, and now all of these things you're speaking about resonate so deeply.
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, that's what I'm feeling, that's what I'm experiencing. And so it's so I just get chills. It's so exciting, and it's so interesting, so fascinating, and so it's just that's why I've said this 1,000 times. So sorry for repeating myself, everyone, but it is why this podcast is called Magic is Real, because I wake up now every day, even if I feel tired. Like I told you, I feel tired today. I was like, but I'm excited to wake up because there's magic everywhere, and what's going to happen today. And
Yeah.
it's exciting when you look at it from the perspective of, this is my soul's choice, in a sense, that my soul said, this is what I want to learn. This is what I'm going into. So now when I face challenges, I'm much more able to just ride the wave and say, all right, it's because it's all in my highest and best. It's all part of the journey. And um, it's some things are harder than others, but it's all flow. And it feels really exciting to hear that from you as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, it's kind of akin to, when you're dreaming at night when you go to sleep. And there's like three main types of dreams that people have. People have the typical dream where you just rehash the events of the day, and that just gets stored in your memory and you don't even really access it. It's just going through and kind of figuring out what happened today, and it gets shoved in the back. And then there are times when you sort of realize that you're dreaming and
Yeah.
you're looking around, like it's not quite a lucid dream yet because you're not altering the
Mhm.
reality of the dream, but at least you understand that you're dreaming and
Yep.
you're kind of, like you said, just looking around, kind of seeing what unfolds and taking it all in. And then there's the third part. When you get these really powerful dreams, and I think a lot more people have these than they realize. I call them power dreams, other people call them lucid dreams. There are multiple types, but you can have these dreams where you understand you're dreaming, and then you can alter it, and you can make that dream go the way that you want it to, or work your way out of, let's say, a fear. um, there was one I had where I was in a really fearful situation, then I realized I was dreaming.
Yeah.
Okay, well, now I can change this because I know what it is that I'm experiencing. So I was able to alter it. So we have those capabilities in our lives to be completely asleep to what we are as soul beings on this planet, or we can wake up. And I think when most people wake up, they wake up in that middle ground where they're like, oh, okay, I know that I'm having this experience. I'm a soul. I'm going to learn from it. I'll do what, I'll come and deal with it as I can and take things as all learning experiences. And then sometimes you have the opportunity to take that awareness of being completely awake in the moment and then altering stuff, altering your decision
Yeah.
making or whatever. So that's when I explain to people, the power in becoming awake in this life. It's not just being physically awake, it's waking up and being more conscious in the moment. You know what I'm talking about. You have then the power that you didn't have as an asleep person.
Yeah.
You have the power to really make healthy decisions and
Absolutely.
loving decisions for the first time in your life.
Oh yeah, that resonates. Before, my coping mechanisms were seeking validation from other people, having relationships with unavailable men, drinking, smoking, not a lot of drugs, but there were drugs involved, and um, eating disorders and all the things of trying to have that were me trying to have control because I
Right.
didn't feel I had control, trying to manipulate situations to get my needs met. Now, I was just speaking with Brooke Grove. I don't know if you know her, but she's another near death experiencer. Brooke and I were talking about how now, because of our spiritual awareness, we're able to just look at things as this is sort of part of the plan. And so it's easy to go with the flow when you go, okay, I'm just going to let um the universe figure it out. I don't have to, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I have to show up for life. I have to show up and I have to keep my head in a positive space and keep my vibration high. And as much as I can, obviously, I'm allowed to feel sadness and all the other human things.
Right.
But that once I do that, I'm just like, I'm not worried about it. Like
Yep.
anything that happens, I'm like, barring someone close to me passing, which I know will be, a much tougher thing, but just in general, the challenges, the jobs that don't come, the relationships that don't work out, the conflicts that I have with other people, I'm like, it's all fine. It'll work itself out and I'm not even worried about it. And I
Yeah.
think that's such an exciting thing to realize is that I don't have to reach out for external validation. In fact, that just makes the pain worse.
Yeah.
What really
Yeah.
feels good now is to reach out to spirit and commune with spirit and say, I every day I talk to spirit and say, you show me what you want for me, you show me the path. It makes things so much easier.
It does it because it's hard for us to see everything from that higher perspective when we're down here in this
Yeah.
physical reality. We can do it. You can train yourself to kind of get that higher perspective, and that's valuable, but also rely on that spiritual connection because you're right. That's where the power comes, whether it's your own higher self, whether it's a divine self, or a divine being, however you want to call it, or spiritual guides. um, Typically, they have a lot more information than we do, though. You have to be careful. You don't just ask whatever spirit happens to be floating by.
Right.
Um, but within reason and with practice, what makes sense, what's reliable information. And I always check in with that. Like, um, when I try to give people examples from my own life because it makes more sense. So when I about it's been a little over 2 years ago now, 2.5 years ago, I had been living in the Seattle area and was starting to feel like the weather was not conducive to my health. It was just not a great place for me to live. Um, I was getting pneumonia like every few months. It was not good. So I knew I needed to leave, but I didn't really know. I didn't really know where I wanted to go to live. And so I talked a lot with my spiritual guides, and they said, "Well, just wander around." I'm like, "What?"
Yeah.
Basically, be a vagabond for 6 or 8 months. Um, And at first, I really rejected it. Like, that's my first reaction. Like, that sounds too crazy. I don't want to be on the road for 8 or whatever months. Or the plan was actually a year. It wasn't 8 months, it was a year. And I just didn't want to do it. But I finally just relented and allowed myself. It wasn't like I was sleeping in my truck or anything. I was staying in Airbnbs. I'd stay
Oh,
in the
van life
Airbnb.
for the middle-aged
Right.
at this point
Not
in our lives. Yeah.
not for me. But I did stay in Airbnbs, which is, it was comfortable. Once in a while I camped out, but only when I really needed to. Um, but I would stay in Airbnbs for a week to 3 weeks at a time, and then go to the next town and just kind of feel it out.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about doing that, which I wouldn't have thought of, it gave me a it gave me a sense of being able to rely on my own sense of the energy of a place and of
Mm-hmm.
people, and I could really start to feel where my energy felt at home and where it didn't. And it was so cool because it wasn't where I expected.
Where
you
did
know
you end up?
Tucson,
Okay.
Arizona.
Yeah.
I didn't expect it to be here. I actually expected to be back in Colorado, which is where I had spent most of my adult life. I thought for sure I would be moving back to Colorado. Nope. This was the place that felt right. Um, I still, I sometimes wonder about it, but it still feels right. So obviously, it was a good choice, and for a lot of different reasons, it was a good choice. In hindsight, but when you learn to kind of connect with that higher spirit, whatever it is, how whatever you want to call it, it can really open up the world. It's
Yeah.
like, wow, I would have never have thought I could do that.
Absolutely. I know it's exciting. And I'm only bringing this up because I mentioned it in the beginning. You and I discussed that we would kind of keep it brief, but I do know that you had, after this near-death experience, you ended up having another, I don't know if you call it a near-death experience, but again, and the only reason I want to bring that up is to kind of talk about why some people kind of keep having them. But
Yeah,
briefly, if you just kind of explain what
yeah,
happened and what happened the second time. And I know that a lot of this is in your book too, so
yeah,
we don't have to go into all the details, but what did happen after that?
yeah. So the second one happened. I guess it was 4 years later, and it was at Christmas time. I had gone on a trip from. I was still living in the Seattle area. I went on a trip to Washington D.C. and then to Chicago, and stayed in Chicago for a few days, and then went back to the Seattle area. When I got back to Seattle, I think it was the day after a Christmas. My daughter was with her dad and his family for Christmas, and so I was kind of by myself that day, which is not really a big deal. But I was just sitting in front of the fireplace, that afternoon, reading, or probably watching a movie too. And I started, like, about noon, noticing I wasn't really feeling very good. Um, Within 4 hours, I was really sick, like 102, 103 fever. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I was really, really ill, and it happened like that. This is pre-COVID, by the way, so it was, this was, I think, 2017. Um, and so I got really sick, really, really fast, and I started to get concerned. I normally, if I get sick, I don't normally get sick that quickly. Um, and I was beginning to wonder if I had something like a bacterial pneumonia
Yeah.
or something that I picked up, on my travels. So I went to bed early, and during the night, I got up a couple of times to go get a cool cloth to put on my face, and passed out like I couldn't even make it to the bathroom, and I just passed out. Um, so then the next morning, when I woke up on the floor, not in my bed, I called and got myself to the OR, or not to the ER, not the OR, but the emergency room. And they got me into the emergency room. Finally, it was a really busy day. And so I was kind of down on the list, but they at least put me in a room. They had some traumas come in. So the docs were in and out handling the traumas and checking up on me. Um, they got me in for it was an x-ray of lungs. They thought I had pneumonia because they could like hear in my chest that like one lung wasn't really working very well. So I got in there and I was basically from the scans working on a quarter of one lung. That's it.
Wow.
I was pretty. The interesting thing is my blood oxygen wasn't too bad. It wasn't horrible. It was down, but it wasn't horrible. But I was really only using a part of one lung, and they got me back to the emergency room the little private room I was in, and they gave me an IV, and then they walked away, and they were going to go get, I think they were going to get antibiotics or something, and they got distracted with another trauma that came in. So here I am laying in this room, and I'm listening to they have me on a heart rate monitor, and my heart rate's getting slower and slower and slower, and I could hear this just almost like from a distance. And I could start feeling myself really separate from my body. It was weird. But what I noticed is that I very slowly I couldn't feel my legs. Then I couldn't feel my hands. I couldn't feel my arms. Um, I didn't know if I was breathing. And then the heart rate monitor started going crazy because apparently my heart rate went below 30 or something. It was really
Wow.
low. And of course, the docs were in a trauma room. Somebody had come in with a gunshot wound. So they're taking care of that person. And I'm just left there. And all of a sudden, I couldn't see anything. I had my eyes wide open, but everything went black. And then I couldn't hear anything. So it was a very gentle, like shutting down of all of my systems. And then I noticed I was floating and starting to float to the ceiling. And I'm like, very calmly,
Yeah.
oh,
This-
so this is how most people die.
Yeah. Much preferred to the other one.
This is how most people do it. And that's what I was thinking, like, yeah, this is how most people do it. It was very gentle. Um, but it was it was natural. My body was naturally shutting down, and I just naturally drifted out. And I'm about, I don't know, halfway or 2/3 of the way to the ceiling, still kind of feeling like I'm laying down. And I turned over and looked at my poor body there on the table and went, "Oh, okay. Well, I'm ready to go now. This is okay." And then that dang voice came back. And that voice said, "It's your choice whether to stay or go. Which will it be?" So this time I was given an in the moment choice. Like I could stay and continue on with a life, or if I left now, it'd be cool.
Yeah.
I had done what I needed to do, and I was released now from my obligation to be here and doing this stuff. And I had this understanding. I had a glimpse of the future, and there were a couple of things that I saw in the future that I wanted to be here for, um, to help other people out. So I stayed, and I was like slammed right back in. As soon as I made the choice, it was boom, right back into my body. My heart rate came back. I woke up. Everything came back. By the time the doctor and the nurse came back in, my lungs had cleared up. They put me back in the X-ray machine. Like, when we listened to you before and those X-rays we did before, we knew that there was something wrong. And she listened to me again. She's like, "I don't hear what I was hearing. We need to scan you again." It was all gone.
That's
The
so
whole thing
interesting.
just like in a heartbeat just cleared up.
I
Uh,
wonder why. Do you have any insight as to why, from a spiritual perspective, that would have happened where they're like, okay, we're going to give her another chance to do it again. And this time we're going to give the choice. I wonder, as far as your path goes, do you have any idea?
there are some thoughts that I had about that. One is, after that big one that we talked about,
Yeah.
I still felt a little resentment for being sent back here. Now, granted, it was technically my choice because I had agreed to do that before I came into this life, but I still felt as if I didn't really have a choice, that I was compelled to be here. So in a way, it was an opportunity for me, I think, to really choose
Yeah.
to do some additional stuff, kind of like extra credit.
Yeah.
Um, but I really had cleared up whatever I needed to clear up in that first little bit of time. So this was kind of like icing on the cake. I could take it and run from here. And it was my choice to do so. And that made me feel more empowered, I think. It made me feel more positive about being here. Because it's hard if you have, for most of us, and most experiencers don't want to talk about how hard it is,
Yeah.
especially the first, excuse me, the first couple of years. There are a lot of, in fact, not too many months ago, a fellow NDEer actually committed suicide because she just couldn't handle it being here anymore.
Yeah.
And that happens more often than we care to admit. It's really, really hard to get that, especially if you have a big awakening with an NDE or an STE or whatever it is. If you really get like pulled wide open, it's tough to be back here sometimes and deal back with the mundane stuff and how people treat each other and not feeling
Yeah.
like you can make a difference. So that can be hard. But the second time, I think it was about choice for me. It was about choosing to add on to my experience and expand it a little bit. Um, and it's interesting because I don't really know at this point where it's going to go. Like before, I knew, okay, I needed to do these certain things in order to feel like I could move on, to my next life. But now it's really open ended, which is kind of
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. It sounds like it. That is, I'm so inspired by everything that you just shared, and I know that my listeners will be too. I just appreciate the depth of the detail that you've shared with us, and I just want to thank you so much for putting that out there because of the reasons that you said. I think we can't change people's minds necessarily, but if someone's an atheist and that's their belief, that's fine. That's their path. There's no necessarily changing their ideas until they've experienced something that gives them. I was an atheist too, agnostic atheist for a lot of my life, even though like you, had these experiences, but just wrote them off as, I don't know what that was, or that's a coincidence, or it must have just been
Right.
some weird optical illusion or something. But I think people find out when they're ready or if they're meant to. But I still think it's so important to continue to put the word out, to offer hope, because life is hard, especially now. It's always been hard. People have gone through hideous things. But if you can understand a little bit more about why it all happens, what's really going on, I think it can offer peace and comfort to a lot of people. And so, what you are doing is important. If you even reach one person, it's
Yeah.
important. And if it's someone who already believes, but it just encourages them to keep going, that's the work, and you're
Yeah.
doing it. So I'm very grateful that you are, and that you're here, and that you chose to be with us.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. So I wish you all the best. And I know we'll be in touch. And I will be putting links to your website and your books underneath in the description.
Okay.
And I would also love to hear more at some point about your course. So I'm sure it'll be up on your website, but that sounds really exciting as well. Is there anything
Yeah.
else that you'd like to leave us with, parting words or things that you have coming
Uh,
up you'd like to share?
yeah, parting words for everyone. I mean, everyone out there, everyone who's
Yeah.
listening is a beautiful, unique individual that has so many beautiful gifts, and don't ever think that you're not worthy or worthwhile. You are, every one of you. I think that's been the most heartbreaking thing for me. One of the things that I like to do is talk to people who are in their last stages of life. And I hear too much from people who say they don't feel worthy to be, meeting God, or going on to
Yeah.
heaven. And like, everyone is worthy. You have had a worthy life. You've had a wonderful life. So think about all the good things that you've brought to your life and to other people. It can be just small stuff, but every one of you out there is worthy. You all have a beautiful legacy that you can share with the world. So do it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Nancy.